She was wearing pale pink that caught the light like something made to be seen. Her curls were perfect. Her gown was flawless. Her invitation was real. Her name was on the list. And still, he made her wait outside. A black woman, standing on marble steps, in a dress that cost more than his monthly salary, holding an invitation that bore the name of one of the most feared men in the city. And Brad Coulter looked at her, and decided, without a single fact to support him, that she did not belong. He asked her to wait, while men in dark suits walked past her, while photographers began to notice. While she stood there, chin up, composure intact, feeling that wound she had carried her entire life reopen in silence. What Brad didn't know was that 4 blocks away, a phone was vibrating on a leather seat. What Brad didn't know was that the man reading that message had a dragon tattooed on his neck, $1 billion distributed across 3 continents, and exactly one person in this world for whom he would stop a car in the middle of the street and walk through the night without being asked twice. What Brad didn't know was that the woman he had just humiliated on those marble steps was about to stand at the podium of that same gala and claim the entire room. But what happened between that moment on the steps and that moment at the microphone changed everything. Before starting the story, comment down below where you were watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. The Grand Ashford had seen every kind of power walk through its doors. It had seen senators arrive with their hands already outstretched, smiling at people whose names they had forgotten 3 events ago. It had seen heiresses draped in borrowed jewels stand beside old men who owned the buildings those jewels came from. It had seen deals disguised as toasts, betrayals dressed as congratulations, and loyalties purchased over a single glass of something that cost more than most people made in a week. The hotel had seen all of it, and it had never blinked. But on this particular evening, on the night of the Westmore Foundation Gala, the Grand Ashford was about to witness something it had never quite seen before. The quiet, unhurried destruction of a man who never understood what he had done wrong. Jade Renée Choi arrived at 9:17 in the evening. The limousine stopped. The door opened, and she stepped out onto marble the color of winter frost, wearing pale pink that caught the light the way certain things do when they were made to be seen. Crystal embroidery scattered across the fabric like something between starlight and intention. Her curls were pinned at the crown, hydrated and full, with small loose coils falling at her temples. The jade bracelet on her left wrist, the one he had given her the morning after she said yes, caught the golden light of the hotel entrance and held it. She moved up the steps the way a woman moves when she has nothing to prove, and has been proving it her entire life anyway. She had her invitation. She had her name on the list that bore the title Guest of Honor at the top, because the Westmore Foundation had approached her 6 months earlier about a potential partnership she had not yet confirmed. She had her husband's surname, which opened rooms that most people did not know existed. And she had something none of those things could give her: the absolute, bone-deep certainty of someone who has learned to walk through resistance without letting it leave a mark. At least, that is what she showed the world. Brad Coulter stood at the top of the steps the way men like him always stand, legs slightly apart, shoulders squared. The posture of someone who has been told that his job is to separate the right people from the wrong ones, and who has never once questioned whether his instincts are the correct instrument for that task. He looked at the invitation she extended. He looked at her. He looked at the invitation again. What crossed his mind in that moment was not malice, exactly. It rarely is in men like Brad. It was something quieter and older, and in many ways more dangerous. Assumption. The simple, unexamined kind. The kind that does not announce itself because it has never needed to. She did not look like what he expected. That was the whole of it. That was the engine of everything that followed. The name on this invite, Choi. I'll need to verify your connection to. I am Jade Renée Choi, she said. Calm, precise. His wife. Another pause. The kind that lasts 4 seconds too long and answers every question without a single additional word being spoken. If you'll just wait here while we confirm. She looked at him then. Not with anger, not with fear, with something far worse for a man in Brad's position. With recognition. The look of someone who has stood in this exact place before, wearing different shoes, on different steps, in front of different versions of the same expression. She stepped to the side of the entrance. She waited. And somewhere, 4 blocks away, in the back of a black car that had just turned the final corner toward the Grand Ashford, a phone vibrated once on a leather seat. Trey Hunte picked it up, read the message, set it face down on the seat beside him. Stock the car, he said. His voice was very low. It always was. The driver stopped, and the dragon on his neck, the one that climbed from collarbone to the space behind his right ear in ink so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, stayed perfectly still as he stepped out into the night and began to walk. The thing about the Grand Ashford on a night like this was that it breathed. Not literally, of course. But if you had stood in the entrance hall long enough, past the marble columns, past the attendants in white gloves carrying trays of champagne that caught the chandelier light like liquid amber, you would have felt it. The slow inhale and exhale of a room full of people performing a version of themselves they had spent years perfecting. The laughter calibrated to carry exactly far enough. The eye contact held precisely long enough to communicate interest without conceding anything. Everyone in that room knew the rules. Everyone, that is, except the man walking 4 blocks away who had never needed to learn them, because he had always been the reason the rules existed. Jade stood at the side of the entrance with her clutch held in both hands and her chin at the precise angle that communicated patience without submission. She had perfected that angle. She had needed it more times than she cared to count. In galleries where curators looked past her to greet the person behind her, in boardrooms where she was asked if she was there to take notes, in restaurants where the host reached past her to hand the menu to the white woman beside her. She had learned, early and permanently, that dignity in those moments was not the absence of feeling. It was the decision to feel everything and show only what she chose. So she stood, and she waited. And she did not give Brad Coulter the satisfaction of watching her hands tremble. Inside, Marcus Webb was in the middle of a conversation he could not easily exit. The kind involving a senator and a pledge and the very specific kind of nodding that was required when someone powerful told you something obvious as though it were a revelation. He did not yet know what was happening at the door. His phone was in his breast pocket, and the vibration he felt he attributed to the same senator's aide, who had been messaging him all evening about seating arrangements. He would check it in a moment. A moment, as it turned out, was going to be the difference between managing a situation and inheriting a disaster. Brad's colleague, a second guard, broader, with the particular expression of someone who enjoyed reinforcement, had drifted toward the entrance and taken a position that was not technically blocking Jade, but was not technically not blocking her either. The photographers on the lower steps had begun to notice. Not all of them. 2. But 2 photographers at an event like this were enough. and the light on Jade's gown was extraordinary, and a woman in pale pink standing outside a gala while men in dark suits walked past her was, even without context, a picture that asked a question. She felt the lenses. She did not react. What she did not know, what she could not have seen from where she stood, was that inside the ballroom, near the far window that looked out onto the side street, 3 men had stopped their conversation. They were not young men. They were the kind of men who had been attending events like this for so long that they could identify, from 50 feet and through plate glass, the specific posture of someone arriving with intention. One of them recognized the walk before he recognized the face. "That's Jay," he said, quietly. The way you say something when you are not sure whether saying it is wise. The other 2 turned, and for a moment, all 3 of them stood at the window and watched Choi Hyun-jae cross the final half-block toward the hotel, with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes fixed on the entrance with an expression that was not anger, because Jay did not do anger, not where anyone could see it, but was instead something colder and more permanent. The third man set his champagne glass down on the nearest tray without looking for it. "Does anyone know what's happening at the door?" Nobody answered, because the answer was already walking up the steps. Jay moved past the photographers without acknowledging the cameras, though he was aware of every single one. He moved past the lower attendants without slowing. He reached the top of the steps, and his eyes went immediately and completely to Jade. Not to Brad, not to the second guard, not to the entrance, or the light, or the marble, or the chandelier glow spilling out from inside. To her. She saw him, and something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly, but the particular exhale of someone who has been holding themselves together by will alone, and can, for one moment, relax the grip. Just slightly. Just enough. He crossed to her. He did not rush. Men like Jay never rushed, because rushing implied that the situation had power over the timeline, and nothing had power over his timeline. He reached her. He took her left hand, the one with the jade bracelet, and placed it on his arm. Then, and only then, he turned his head toward Brad. The tattoo on his neck caught the light. The dragon climbed his throat in silence. He looked at Brad the way a man looks at something that is temporarily in the way. Not with hostility, but with the absolute, undecorated awareness that it will move. "This is my wife," he said. 3 words. The volume of a private conversation. The weight of something said in a courtroom. Brad opened his mouth. "Let her in." Brad Coulter would later struggle to explain what happened in his body in that moment, not to anyone else. He would never speak of this night again if he could help it. But to himself, in the quiet of his apartment afterward, replaying it the way you replay something that humiliated you before you understood you were being humiliated. He would try to locate the exact second his certainty left him. He would not find it, because it had not left in a single second. It had dissolved, the way things dissolve when the temperature changes. Not breaking, not shattering, simply becoming something that could no longer hold its shape. He stepped back. He did not say yes. He did not say, "Of course," or "My apologies," or any of the things that the situation demanded. He simply stepped back, the way the body moves when the mind has not yet caught up. And the entrance was open, and Jade Renée Choi walked through it on her husband's arm, with her chin at that same precise angle, and her gown scattering light across the marble floor of the grand Ashford, like something that had always belonged there. Because it had. Because she had. The photographers caught it. Not the words. They were too far for the words. But the image. The couple on the threshold. the pale pink gown, the black suit, the tattoo at his neck, the hand on his arm, the posture of two people who had just walked through something and chosen not to look back at it. Those photographs would circulate before midnight, but that was later. That was consequence. First, there was the room. The ballroom of the Grand Ashford on a night like this was the kind of space that was designed to make you feel, the moment you entered it, that everything outside its walls was smaller and less significant than whatever was happening within them. Chandeliers descended from the ceiling in tiers of warm gold. Round tables draped in ivory linen held centerpieces of white orchids and tapered candles. The string quartet in the far corner played something that no one was listening to, but everyone appreciated. And everywhere, in every handshake, every leaned-in whisper, every glass raised in the direction of someone across the room, there was the texture of power arranging and rearranging itself. The room noticed them enter. It did not stop. Rooms like this never stop. But it noticed, in the way a current notices an obstacle, shifting and adjusting and moving around it while pretending to flow in exactly the same direction it always had. Heads turned and returned, conversations stuttered by half a beat. And across the room, the three men who had been watching from the window turned away from it as Jae and Jade moved into the space. Because looking too long at Chae Hyun-jae was its own kind of statement. Marcus Webb felt the room shift before he understood why. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his phone, read the message from Jade's driver, the one he had missed 11 minutes ago, and felt something cold move through his chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He was already moving through the crowd before he finished reading it. Jade, my God. He arrived in front of them with the expression of a man who needed the next 30 seconds to go very well. I only just saw. There was a situation at the door. Marcus. Jay's voice was pleasant. It was always pleasant. That was the thing about him that people who did not know him failed to understand, and the thing that people who did know him never forgot. The pleasantness was not a mask. It was simply the outermost layer of something that went down much further than pleasantness. Who contracted the security firm for tonight? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. The senator he had been speaking with 20 minutes ago suddenly seemed very far away. The foundation uses Coulter Group for most of our... Jane nodded once, slowly. The way you nod when someone has confirmed something you already knew, and the knowing of it is enough. He did not press, he did not elaborate. He simply filed it, visibly, quietly, with the unhurried manner of a man who had never once needed to rush a consequence because consequences, in his experience, arrived exactly when he intended them to. He turned to Jade then, completely, as though Marcus had already ceased to be the subject of the conversation. Are you all right? He asked her. Just that, in Korean accented English that softened slightly at the edges when he spoke to her, the way it always did, a register he used for no one else in any room, ever. She looked at him for a moment, and in that moment, in the privacy of his attention, she allowed herself to be exactly as she was. Not the woman with the angle and the composure and the years of practice. Just Jade. Just tired and seen and grateful in a way that had nowhere to go but inward. I am now, she said. He held her gaze for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he turned back to the room, and the room received him, and the evening continued in the way that evenings like this always continued, forward, relentlessly, toward whatever it had always been moving toward. What no one in that ballroom yet understood, not Marcus, not the senator, not the 3 men at the window, not Brad Coulter still standing at the top of the marble steps, trying to locate the moment his certainty had gone, was that the most significant thing to happen at the Westmore Foundation Gala had not yet happened. It was being decided, quietly, over the next hour, in the conversations Jade chose to have and the ones he chose not to have, in the way he moved through the room with Jade beside him and introduced her first, always first, to every person they approached. "This is my wife, Jade, her foundation." Not his name, not his money, not his shadow, stretching across the room ahead of them. Her foundation. He said it 11 times before the evening's formal program began. Jade counted. She always counted the things that cost him nothing and meant everything. And somewhere in the architecture of those 11 introductions, in the handshakes that followed and the business cards exchanged, and the quiet nods from people who understood exactly what kind of evening this had become, the shape of what would be announced at the closing ceremony was already inevitable. It had been inevitable, perhaps, from the moment Brad Coulter took one look at a woman in pale pink on marble steps and decided, without a single fact to support him, that she did not belong. The formal program of the Westmore Foundation Gala began at 11 o'clock, which was late by the standards of most events, and perfectly timed by the standards of this one. By 11, the champagne had done its work. By 11, the handshakes had become conversations, and the conversations had become commitments, and the commitments had settled into the particular kind of comfortable certainty that powerful people feel when an evening has gone the way they expected it to. The string quartet had given way to a pianist, the candles had burned down by a third, and Marcus Webb stood at the podium at the front of the ballroom with his notes in one hand and the specific expression of a man who was about to say something that would either save or define the remainder of his professional life. He had spent 40 minutes making a decision. He had spent the 40 minutes before that understanding that there was, in fact, only one decision available to him. The room settled. Glasses were set down. The pianist finished his phrase and let it dissolve into silence. And Marcus cleared his throat and began to speak about the Westmore Foundation, the way people always began to speak about institutions like it, with history, with gratitude, with the carefully constructed narrative of an organization that had always been on the right side of things. Jade sat at the table closest to the left of the stage. Jay was beside her, one arm resting along the back of her chair, not possessively, but in the manner of someone who had decided, some years ago, that proximity to this particular person was the only luxury that had ever felt necessary. His champagne glass was untouched. It was always untouched at events like this. He watched Marcus the way he watched most things in rooms like this, with the patient, complete attention of someone who already knew how it ended and was waiting, with something approaching mercy, for everyone else to arrive at the same conclusion. "This year," Marcus said, and his voice steadied as he said it, "the Foundation is proud to announce the largest single arts patronage commitment in our 23-year history." The room responded with the particular quality of attention that money produces. Not silence exactly, but a sharpening, a collective leaning in. "The Choi Arts and Culture Initiative," Marcus continued, "will fund, over the next 5 years, the exhibition, elevation, and permanent institutional placement of works by Black emerging artists across 14 cities, in galleries, in public installations, and in private collections that have, historically, not reflected the full scope of American artistic achievement." He paused. "This initiative is the vision of its founder, whose commitment to this work predates her connection to this foundation by nearly a decade. It is my honor, and, frankly, my privilege, to introduce the woman whose name this initiative bears, and whose presence here tonight is something this foundation does not take lightly." He looked directly at Jade. Jade Renée Choi. The room rose. Not all of it, not immediately. These things never happen all at once. But in the way that standing ovations actually happen in rooms like this, which is one person recognizing what is required and the rest following within 3 seconds, because no one in a room like this wants to be the last one standing. Jade set her clutch on the table. She stood. She smoothed the pale pink of her gown with one hand, a gesture so small and so human that 3 people in the room would remember it specifically, years later, when they described this night to people who had not been there. She walked to the podium. The jade bracelet caught the light from the chandelier directly above the stage, and for just a moment, it held it completely. That small circle of gold and green, before releasing it back into the room. She stood at the microphone and looked down at the ballroom, at the ivory tablecloths and the orchids, and the candles burned down by a third, and the faces, all the faces, turned toward her in the particular way that rooms turn toward someone when they have finally, irrevocably, understood that they are in the presence of someone they underestimated. She let the silence breathe. She had earned this silence. She had been buying it for years, in the currency of composure, in the careful and costly business of never letting them see the moments that cost her something. Tonight had cost her something. The marble steps had cost her something. Brad Coulter's 4-second pause had cost her something, the way it always cost something, even when you had learned to carry it without showing the weight. But this was not the moment to spend that cost. This was the moment to invest it. "I want to begin," she said, and her voice in the microphone was clear and warm and entirely unhurried. "By thanking the Westmore Foundation for this partnership." She paused. Her eyes moved, just briefly, toward the entrance of the ballroom, toward the large double doors that stood open at the far end of the room, beyond which, if you knew where to look, you could see the top of the marble staircase and the faint shape of a figure still standing at his post. Brad Coulter, to his credit, had not left. She did not know whether that said something about his professionalism or his obliviousness, and she found, standing at the podium of the Westmore Foundation Gala, that she did not particularly need to know. "I also want to say something about belonging," she continued, "not as an abstraction, not as a theme, but as a daily, lived, specific experience. The experience of walking into a room and being asked, in ways both spoken and unspoken, to justify your presence in it." The room was very quiet. This initiative exists because there are artists, extraordinary artists, who have been standing at the doors of institutions like this one for their entire careers, with their work in their hands and their invitations in their pockets, and have been asked to wait. She did not look at the doors again. She did not need to. They will not be waiting anymore. The room rose for the second time that night. This time, it rose all at once. Jay did not rise with it. He remained seated, his champagne glass still untouched beside him, and he watched her at the podium the way he had watched her from the first moment he understood what she was. Not with the pride of ownership, never that, but with something rarer and more specific, the pride of witness, of a man who had seen someone clearly from the beginning and had never once needed her to be smaller than she was. The dragon on his neck was still. The room was loud. And Jade Renée Choi stood in the light of the grand Ashford and let the applause come toward her the way she had always let everything come, squarely, openly, without flinching. Later, when the evening finally released them and the limousine moved through the quiet streets of a city that did not know what had happened inside that ballroom, Jay took her left hand and held it in both of his. He did not say anything for a long time. The city moved past the windows. The jade bracelet rested between his palms. "You were magnificent," he said, finally. She looked out the window, smiled at her own reflection. "I know," she said. And she had been. From the first step on the marble staircase to the last word at the podium, she had been exactly, completely, irreducibly herself. A woman who had been asked to wait outside a room that was already hers, and who had walked back in and claimed it anyway. Not loudly, not violently, not with the satisfaction of revenge, with something better and more permanent and far more difficult to take away. With grace. Jade walked into that room fully prepared, fully qualified, fully worthy, with her invitation in her hand, her name on the list, her gown catching every light in the room. And still, someone decided, without a single fact to support him, that she didn't belong. But here's what he didn't see, what they never see. The woman standing on those marble steps wasn't waiting to be let in. She was already deciding exactly how she was going to walk back through those doors and claim everything that was already hers. That kind of presence doesn't happen by accident. It starts every single morning. In the mirror, in the ritual, in the decision to show up for yourself before the world gets a chance to weigh in. If your skin has been through stress, dark spots that won't fade, products that were never formulated for you, there is a complete guide built on Korean science created specifically for Black women. The right ingredients for your melanin. A full AM and PM routine. A 30-day method to transform your skin from the inside out. Jade didn't ask for permission to belong in that room. You don't need permission to have the skin you deserve. The QR code is on your screen right now. Or find the link in the description and the pinned comment. Go claim it. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever walked into a room fully prepared, fully qualified, fully worthy, and still been made to feel like you had to prove it, simply because of how you looked? And have you ever witnessed someone be completely underestimated, only to watch them rise in a way that left the room with nothing left to say? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and grace, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.